So the next segment here is I want to start showing you some photos. Now that we've talked about the gear and the tech, I want to start going through the camera settings. What do we need to know about ISO, shutter speed, aperture? So before this class, actually last week, we spent some time outdoors and we did a bunch of pre-shoots out in the field. And throughout the rest of the day, we have these pre-shoot videos to show you. It's basically me saying the same thing I say here in the classroom, but I'm doing it outside on location. So let's go into our first one, which is all about camera settings and flash settings. And then when we come back, we'll ask questions, I'll answer those questions. Here we go. You can see we've got a cloudy day. So what's going through my mind is I'm trying to understand what ISO I want to be at, what aperture I want to be at, and what shutter speed I want to be at. So in the studio, a lot of times you're maybe trying to exclude the ambient light. You know, you're trying to exclude the fluorescent lights or the incandescent lights in the studio. But out here, when you're shooting outside on location, a lot of times you want to incorporate the ambient light. And because it's a cloudy day, I might want to actually use a little bit higher ISO. So before I go into all of the settings of the camera, let's set the ISO. And on this camera, this is a Nikon D500. I'm just going to push the ISO button here and then rotate my thumb dial. And you can see I'm changing my ISO between 100 to 200. I think outside right now, I'm going to go with an ISO 200 as a starting point. As we shoot later on today, I might go up to 400. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so let's go through and talk about the other camera settings. One of my favorite things to do is basically go around the camera body, pushing the buttons that pertain to my exposures and my my shots. So I usually just start down here in the lower left and work my way around. Let's do that. Over here on the left side, there's really nothing on this camera to adjust. On some cameras, you'll find your ISO button, you'll find your white balance button up here, actually. So let's go and push the mode button. The mode button changes between program mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual mode. For most of my location work, when I'm outside, I like to shoot in manual exposure mode. It gives me full control. It gives me the ability to say, no, I just want to adjust aperture now without shutter speed changing, or vice versa, okay? So next is white balance. Well, it's a cloudy day, so I'm probably going to choose cloudy white balance if I'm concerned about the ambient light. But you know, this is a flash class, and we're thinking about flash, the color of flash. So I'm actually going to choose flash white balance. In fact, let me show it on this screen here. It's a little bit bigger. So white balance there, and there's a little icon in the lower right-hand part of the screen. It's a little lightning bolt that stands for flash white balance. Okay. Next, I'm going to go back up here on top because that's where the button is. The qual button, well, that's the image quality. I like shooting raw. Raw is where it's at as far as I'm concerned. It gives me a lot of flexibility later on in software to adjust my exposures. The next button here is my metering mode. For most of my metering, I use matrix metering or multi-pattern metering, and I'll use that today, and I'll explain as the day goes on why that's important. All right, next we have this dial here. This is my shooting mode dial. In other words, how many frames per second. Right here, I'm going to set it for S, for single frame rate. This camera shoots at 10 frames per second, and there's no way, if I was in continuous high, there's no way the camera could, or the flashes could keep up with me. So I'm going to stay in single frame rate. In other words, one shot, and then kind of reframe, take another shot. All right, now let's go back over to here. ISO, we already talked about that. That's a very important one. We'll be changing ISO as the day goes on. And then here we've got exposure compensation. And this button here adjusts the brightness of the background. But I'm going to be in manual exposure mode. Well, how do you adjust the brightness of the background in manual exposure mode? Well, you just adjust your shutter speed or you adjust your aperture. So I don't really need to be using the exposure compensation button. Rather, what I'm doing now is I'm just checking to make sure it's actually zeroed out, and it is. It's at 0.0. All right. Now, the next things we've got to be thinking about is aperture and shutter speed. And to show those, I'll go to the big screen on the back so it's a little bit easier to see. Here you can see I'm at f5 and I'm at 1/80th of a second. And you can also see on my exposure line, it says I'm really overexposed. You know, I'm at 1, 2, 3. I'm 3 stops overexposed. So I need to adjust my shutter speed and aperture down to where it's kind of zeroed out. And now you'll see I'm at f5 at a 6/40th of a second. And that doesn't make sense really for flash photography, as we'll explain in just a little bit when we talk about flash shutter speed synchronization. So for now, maybe if I go something like f8 at a 2/50th or so, that's about right for a starting exposure. A lot of people want to start with the flash when we're talking about flash photography. It's like, oh, I'm outside, I'm doing flash work, I'm going to start with the flash settings. But that's the wrong approach. Really what we need to do is we need to start with the camera body, get all of that squared away, and then once that's ready to go, then we start going to the flash. So let's do that now. All right, so I'm using the Nikon system, but what I want to point out here is that everything I'm going to show you is really translatable to Canon or Fuji or Sony. Most of these technologies that I'll talk through have analogs in other with other camera gear. So this here is a Nikon SB5000, and when I turn it on, I'm going to turn it on to the remote setting, all right? And today I'll be using a mixture of different types of triggering technologies, but for this example, I'm just going to show you that I'm going to trigger it with the Nikon Creative Lighting System, or the Nikon Wireless System. So this button here, when I push this toggles between different wireless remote modes, okay? And for this situation, I'm just going to go here to remote, and it says remote TTL. The next thing I need to be concerned about is the channel and the group. Okay, so you can see here I'm in channel 5, group A. So in my camera body, I also have to set my camera body so it's speaking to channel 5, group A. The next thing I'm going to check is make sure that it's linked up. That's what this little green light is here on top. It's linked. And if I pull my camera up, you can see that the transmitter here also has a green light. So I'm linked up, everything's synchronized. And that's it for the flash. You know, just make sure you have full batteries and you're ready to go. All of the other settings in these wireless remote systems happen from the transmitter. And in this case, the transmitter is the camera body. So let's go now into the settings in the menu to talk about the flash setup. So I'm in what's called the photo shooting menu, and then I scroll down here to flash control. I go into that menu, and I set it for the wireless flash options. You can see I've set it for radio flash control. Remote flash control, this guy, the remote flash, what do I want that to be? Well, there's a couple of different options. In this case, I want it to be in the group flash settings, okay? So this will be one flash in a group. Next is the group flash options. So remember here, we show we're on group A, so group A, and here it says I'm in TTL mode for this flash, which is fantastic. This is where I want to be to start off. But as we'll see throughout the day, sometimes I want to be going down to manual flash mode. And then to change the power of that flash, I can go up or down with my multi-selector. So like this would be manual output at 1/8 power, okay? But for now, we'll leave it at group A, TTL, and then if I need to change the compensation or the brightness of that flash, I just basically go up and down from here. And then to set that in place, you push the OK button and the OK, pow, we're good to go. And then radio remote flash info, well, basically just says, hey, that's an SB5000, and if I had more flashes in the setup, it'd show me different flashes, and I can kind of control each of those independently. So anyways, when you do flash settings, the flash settings are very limited. Really what's happening is you're just telling that flash what you want it to do. Do you want to go manual output? Do you want to go TTL? And that's it. The flash just kind of sits there and does its thing. So there's camera settings and flash settings. Well, let me just summarize the most important aspects. All flash photography begins with the camera. Okay? So even though we go out and you buy this $29 flash or this $500 flash, it doesn't matter. You should always base it with the camera. So the important things are setting your ISO. Most of the time we're dealing with a little speed light, one single speed light, and we don't have a lot of power. So I would bias my ISOs in general a little bit higher, okay? 200s, 400s, somewhere in that range. But you're going to see it throughout the other videos that we produced here. A lot of times I'm even at 100, and sometimes I'm at 50. So there's no good answer for ISO. You're going to use the right ISO for your situation, for your environment. Apertures, for this type of flash photography, I'm always between f2.8 and f8. Okay? Very, very rarely am I going to f16 or f22. The reason why is these flashes just don't have enough power to pump through that little aperture. So that's a downside to using these small flashes. How would you shoot f16, f22? You have to have 2 flashes, 3 flashes, 4 flashes. So if you need more depth of field, for example, if you're photographing an automobile, let's say your neighbor has a 1957 Chevy and he just painted it and he wants you to photograph it, and you need from the front bumper to the back of the vehicle in focus, well, you have to be at f16. The only way to do that is to bring in more flashes to the party, okay? And maybe even flashes on different light stands, through the length of the car. So in general, if you're using one flash, stick around f4 to f5.6, somewhere in that range, okay? Shutter speed, well, we're limited, right? We're limited to 1/250th of a second, or whatever your camera's maximum sync speed is. So for the camera I have here today, that's 1/250th. I have other Nikon cameras that are 1/200th, and I know a lot of Canon cameras are limited to 1/200th. Some Canons go up to 1/250th. So just keep that in mind. Whatever your shutter speed is, initially, you can't go above 1/250th, and you'll see why in a little bit. And then shutter sync. On each camera, you have the synchronization mode. Normal sync, rear curtain sync, red eye reduction modes. These are synchronization modes. You have to set that in generally for rear sync, because if there's any movement, you want the blur to be behind the action, behind the activity, okay? Well, how about flash settings? In my mind, even though our flashes these days, especially like the $500 Nikon and Canon flashes, they have 5 to 7 exposure modes on them. TTL, TTL-BL, RPT, GN, manual, that's 5, and I know there's A, there's AA. So you've got all of these different flash exposure modes. I think there's only 2 that you need to worry about, TTL and manual, okay? And most of the stuff that I do, I use manual. I use TTL when I shoot an event. I just shot an event, a fundraising event this weekend, and I shot TTL because I'm moving around, right? I'm photographing here, I'm photographing there, the light's bright, the light's dark. TTL allows you to do that quickly. But when I do this outdoor portraiture, I'm almost always in manual because the light stand is there and I've got my subject there, the flower's not moving, So when things are stationary and I'm on stands, I tend to go with manual mode. Pretty simple. Flash settings are easy. 2 options. Flash power, that's the next thing. In TTL mode, we're dealing with, TTL is a little bit different. TTL is through the lens metering. And what the camera's trying to do is trying to make the flash make a medium brightness exposure. Middle gray, you've heard of that term before? Or 18% gray. That's kind of what the flash is trying to do. Make that exposure so it's middle of the road. Well, middle of the road is, it's middle of the road. And sometimes you want it brighter and sometimes you want it darker. So in TTL mode, you go +1. +1 means 1 stop more than middle gray. -1 means 1 stop less than middle gray. So typically, for outdoor flash photography, you've got what I call the key light. And the key light is Del Sol, the sun, okay? The sun is the key light. Your flash most of the time is the fill light. So the fill is almost never as bright as the key. So almost always when I'm using TTL, my fill starts out at like a -1. It's just a good kind of starting point. And as you'll see in all these videos that we produced, I'm changing the power all the time. But I generally start my outdoor flash at about a -1 when I'm using TTL. How about manual mode? Well, manual is different. Manual, there is no metering from the camera. You're doing it. It's manual. So you're actually deciding, you're like turning the volume dial. 0, all the way up to maximum. So what is maximum? Well, all of these flashes have a maximum power output of 1/1. That means 100% power, full power. So 1/2. So if this is 1/1, half power is half of the brightness. Quarter, 1/8, 1/16, 32nd. So you're controlling the power based on whatever the full dump is, the full power output. And as I say again, you might need 2 or more flashes. Like if you're maxed out at 1/1, or if you're even in TTL mode and you're at like +2 or +3 and you're like, oh, it's still not pumping out enough light. I need more power. The way you get more power is more flashes. So before I get to the next section is building your exposure. Let me just see if there's any quick questions on camera settings or flash settings.
So when you're shooting in certain places, there's really deep shadows. On the video, you said to expose your camera first. How important is it to expose to those shadows or those highlights, depending on your environment, without considering the flash?
Yeah, good. So you're going to see, in fact, I'm so happy you asked your question now, because it's the perfect segue to our next video. And the next video is all about building your exposure. So the way I like to work, and again, this is one man's opinion, and I know all those out there in the internet land, you may have a different approach to this, but the way I work is I start with the ambient light exposure. So I take my pictures first with no flash, and I look. All of our cameras have a screen that has a blinky screen. It shows you the blown out highlights. So I'm looking, for example, on the shoulder of the photo. Am I blowing out the shoulder? Or here on the forehead? Before I even add flash, am I blowing anything out? So a lot of times I will set my exposure so I get no blinkies or no blown out highlights. All right, that's my base exposure, my ambient exposure. Then I add the flash in to fill in those shadows. So is that really what you're asking?
Yeah, and also just considering backgrounds and like off subject.
Yeah, so like is the background in the shade?
Right.
So this happens all the time. In fact, one of the photos I'm going to show when I show shooting in the sun, the background was actually in the shadow, and that's a different exposure overall than if the background's in direct sun. And so there's no easy answer for you. Other than, maybe the best answer I have for you is, what is your artistic desire for that photo? Do you want the background to be darker, to make the photo look a little bit more moody, a little more heavy? Do you want that background to be brighter and airier, to be a high-key photo? If so, that's where you set that base exposure, okay? And then your flash just fills in from there. So I know that wasn't a specific answer, but it's really about your artistic decision. Sure. How do you want it to look?
Cool, thanks.
Let me just do one question.
Okay.
This is from Ralph Soma, who's wondering, is there sort of a consideration in terms of the largest size softbox or umbrella perhaps that will work efficiently with just one speed light before it gets too big for that power?
Yeah, great. When I first started out, like everybody else here, I bought a softbox and an umbrella because everyone told me you need to have a softbox and an umbrella. So I bought an umbrella, it was like this big, and I bought a softbox that was like this big, because it was only $13 at the local camera store. And I was like, oh, cool. And no problem, your flash can fill all those up. And then I got this thought in my mind, like, oh, if I get a big softbox, then I have to get big lights because those big lights will fill the softbox. Well, what I found over the years is all of my big, huge honking stuff works just great with my little speed lights. Here's the thing. You just have to make sure, I'm going to walk over this way, camera folks, so you can see. You just have to make sure that your flash fills the entire umbrella. So in this case, when this flash fires, you're going to, the angle of coverage will only actually go out to about here. So how do I fill the interior of this umbrella? Great solution. These little diffusion domes that you get for free with your $500 flash. This little plastic thing, it's worth its weight in gold. You just put that on there, and now what that does is it causes the light to go everywhere and fill up the interior. And the same thing goes for soft boxes. If you use these little diffusion domes, the light will actually shine to all corners of the softbox.